Come with me and 9 other old friends on a road trip down Highway 61, the Blues Highway, starting in Memphis and winding up in New Orleans. Our objective is to soak up the rich music and culture of the Delta, with stops in Clarksville, Vicksburg, and Natchez as we follow the Mississippi River. Our October 2023 trip started with a wonderful meal at the historic Peabody Hotel in Memphis, where we posed for a group photo, but didn't check in. Instead, we found unique Airbnbs along the way that allowed us to come together as a group, to drink a bit of wine and tell our stories. This one in Memphis provided lots of room while making a rather distinctive architectural statement. We all grew up with the music of Elvis Presley, but had no idea that the Memphis home he called Graceland is second only to the White House in attracting visitors. Currently, about 650,000 come through each year. This colonial revival-style mansion with its 23 rooms was built in 1939. By 1957, Elvis had done well enough to buy it for a little over $100,000. I can't imagine what it's worth today. It was here that he died in 1977 at the age of 42. Upon entering, we come to a living room frozen in time and in taste to the 1970s. The far end opens into a music room where Elvis could play piano by ear, just as he had learned to play guitar, without being able to read a note of music. In his career, Elvis recorded more than 600 songs across multiple genres. The opulent dining room at Graceland is dominated by a massive crystal chandelier. Downstairs is a TV room, where Elvis and his friends would sometimes watch 3 TVs at once. As if that weren't enough to look at, there are mirrors everywhere. Elvis loved to play billiards, and to make things cozy, he had the ceiling and walls covered with 300 or 400 yards of very busy patterned fabric to match the stuffed furniture. The jungle room defies description, but it came in handy when Elvis was not doing well at the end. He used it as a makeshift studio to record his last 2 albums. Outside is a swimming pool, and behind that is a fountain and meditation garden, where Elvis and several of his family members are buried. As time went on, Graceland expanded well beyond the mansion. There's a museum devoted to Elvis's movie career. He made more than 24 Hollywood films with formulaic musical themes that did not impress the critics, but fans loved them and bought the soundtracks. Another exhibit features Elvis's sequined jumpsuits that became his concert trademark, especially in Las Vegas. Elvis loved to collect classic cars. I couldn't resist posing with his pink Cadillac. The original 13-acre estate has expanded to 120, plenty of room to showcase his 2 jets, a Corvair 880 named for daughter Lisa Marie, and a Lockheed Jetstar used for business. Beyond that, Graceland has a resort hotel, a conference center, multiple places to eat, gift shops, and even a few horses. Elvis loved horses. Let's take a look at where Elvis Presley got his start. A fellow named Sam Phillips owned the Memphis Recording Service, where 18-year-old Elvis showed up one day in 1954 and asked if he could pay to make a record for his mother as a birthday gift. Phillips was willing to record anything for anybody, but he was especially interested in bringing the sound of African American music to a wider audience. There was just something about Elvis's style that intrigued him, if not at first, eventually. When Phillips started his Sun Records label, the building became Sun Studio. Today, it's a National Historic Landmark. We went inside to find out why. A photo on the wall helped to explain. A newspaper photographer had captured a moment in time showing an impromptu jam session with Elvis at the piano, surrounded by Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, and Johnny Cash. The story was headlined, $1 Million Quartet. We found ourselves in a cafe and gift shop waiting to enter the hallowed space, which could be considered the birthplace of rock and roll. We were standing where other great performers like Roy Orbison, Ike Turner, Charlie Rich, and B.B. King had recorded in the early days. But more recent sessions have featured contemporary artists such as U2, Def Leppard, Bonnie Raitt, and Ringo Starr. We tourists got to see the live room by day, but nighttime is reserved for actual recording sessions. Maybe, just maybe, the sun would shine on our musical talents. Our visit turned somber as we made our way to the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, where civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated by a sniper in 1968. He had been standing on this balcony outside his room, number 306, when a shot rang out that shocked the world. The Lorraine Motel has been preserved as part of the first National Civil Rights Museum, which was established in 1991 and is now a Smithsonian affiliate. Outside, we saw vintage cars of the era. And inside, we took a visual trip through 5 centuries of history, from slavery and the Civil War through the Jim Crow era and more recent protest movements that have led to major civil rights change in our lifetime. Murals, statues, films, and artifacts provide a moving and dramatic telling of the story. Being of a certain vintage ourselves, we were witness to much of the late 20th century fight for racial equality captured so powerfully in this gem of a museum. In a small park at the end of Beale Street in Memphis stands the bronze statue of a man holding a trumpet. It's the famed blues musician W.C. Handy, who composed the song Blues on Beale Street. As time went on, Beale Street became known as home of the blues. Our group assembled at the base of Handy's statue before heading out to see if jazz and blues legends like Louis Armstrong, Muddy Waters, and B.B. King had left any of their musical notes lying around. Sure enough, B.B. King's presence is strongly felt here at a blues club named for him. Let's go inside, where not everything is what you'd call blues. You might even find yourself singing along. Leaving Memphis, we headed down Highway 61 into the Mississippi Delta, where blues music had its birth. Slaves in the cotton fields gave it voice, and small towns like Clarksville gave it a home. A tiny visitor center in Tunica, Mississippi, welcomed us to the region. Down the road in Clarksdale, an old railroad passenger depot had been converted into a fascinating Delta Blues Museum. In it, we found artifacts and artwork celebrating the contributions of early blues musicians. Take a look around. Notable among the featured blues legends was Muddy Waters, who found his way to Chicago back in the 1940s and a successful recording career. The shack where he grew up had been moved from the Stovall plantation near Clarksdale to be preserved as testament to his humble roots. The Blues Museum had made us hungry for live music, so we looked for actor Morgan Freeman's Ground Zero Blues Club. But it was dark on Monday nights. The Paramount Theater had been dark since the 1990s, when it used to help host Clarksdale's annual blues and gospel festivals. Wade Walton was a barber and renowned musician who died in the year 2000. The little blues club attached to Wade's barber shop looked abandoned. No music there. So we checked out Cathead Delta Blues and Folk Art Shop, where I was able to buy a Muddy Waters early recording to take home. The owner directed us to Hambone, which does double duty as an art gallery and music venue. We were in luck. It had a nice bar and entertainment by the Reverend Robert. So we settled in. How would you like to sleep in a rickety old place bearing the name the Shack Up Inn? Our lodging near Clarksville proved to be one of the highlights of our trip. We should have known when we checked in that this was no ordinary Airbnb. It was deliberately primitive. A former cotton gin building housed a bar, gift shop, and occasional music venue filled with vintage treasures of all kinds. When we were shown to our sleeping quarters, we were assigned to 2-bedroom shotgun houses that had served as homes for sharecroppers on the surrounding plantations. The nicest ones had verandas with rocking chairs, the perfect place to rock away your worries. The shacks had been artfully restored enough to provide basic creature comforts, such as cozy beds, indoor plumbing, heat and air conditioning, coffee makers, refrigerators, and microwave ovens. What more does a weary traveler need? Each shack bore the name of a notable Delta musician. Mine honored Pinetop Perkins, as shown in this painting, along with a piano that just begged to be played. The weather was perfect for gathering outside, where we could share food and drink and tell endless stories.
And the Navy provided the transport boats, which looked like they were made back in D-Day times.
As we looked around at our eclectic surroundings, we all agreed that the Shack Up Inn was the coolest place we had ever stayed. Truly one of a kind. Cantilever bridges connect Vicksburg, Mississippi with Delta, Louisiana. The old Vicksburg Bridge on the right now carries only railroad traffic, since all motor vehicles were moved to the new Vicksburg Bridge on the left. As you can imagine, barges were known to collide with these bridges until radar was installed in 2013 to assist their captains in threading the needle. It's not an easy passage. Touring the Vicksburg National Military Park immersed us in history in the safest way possible. Battlegrounds are now art galleries, covered with impressive monuments and sculptures. In fact, this one has 1,325 markers and monuments scattered about. I promise not to show you all of them, but here are just a few. The cannons are silent now, but sit atop bluffs and strategic positions that enabled Vicksburg to control commerce on the Mississippi River below. For 3 months in 1863, Union General Ulysses S. Grant sought to split the Confederacy in two by taking control of the city and river at this key location. Unable to attack from the water or win on the battlefield, the Union forces surrounded the whole area and cut off food, supplies, and ammunition for 2 months, until the besieged Confederate Army surrendered the city on July 4, 1863. The siege had lasted 47 days. Starvation worked. Years later, when the imposing Illinois Monument was built as a replica of the Pantheon in Rome, it had symbolically 47 steps, one for each day of the siege. Once inside, we saw that the names of Union military leaders had been memorialized on the walls that encircled us. Just like the Pantheon in Rome, as we looked up, we saw an oculus open to the elements, and just like in Rome, the circular floor had been sloped downward from the center in order to drain rainwater to the perimeter. Illinois had truly found a way to serve as a dominant focal point on the battleground. One of the most interesting exhibits we saw in the Vicksburg National Military Park was a restoration of the USS Cairo, an ironclad Union gunboat that had been sunk in 1862 on the Yazoo River upstream from here. Look over elements of the restoration as I tell you its story. The USS Cairo was the first ship ever to be sunk by a mine or torpedo remotely detonated by hand. It went down in 12 minutes, but there were no casualties. The USS Cairo had previously helped Union forces occupy Memphis on the Mississippi River. But when it sank into the Yazoo River mud, it took more than 100 years to find it and recover it. It finally was restored and given its own museum here at Vicksburg, which opened to the public in 1980. Have you ever thought about tackling the Mississippi River in a canoe? Our group decided that sounded like a great idea, so we assembled at the Vicksburg Riverfront Boat Ramp and prepared to try it. It's a big river with lots going on, but we were up for the adventure. We figured the 10 of us, plus our guide, could easily fit in one canoe, so off we went. Did someone say something about synchronizing our paddle strokes? Oh well, there's a learning curve for everything. Soon we found ourselves in the big river, watching a towboat pushing a giant barge. This is a standard barge about 190 feet long and 35 feet wide, carrying up to 1,500 tons of cargo. We were paddling with the big boys, or so we thought. Then we left the tributary and beheld not one barge, but the spectacle of some 25 or more barges grouped together, being pushed by one towboat. Yes, it's called a towboat, even though it's pushing. We watched the captain of this towboat push a cluster of 5 barges abreast, extending 5 barges ahead under the upcoming railroad bridge. A delicate maneuver. The navigable channel had been narrowed by severe drought and had to be dredged by the U.S. Corps of Engineers to a depth of 9 feet or more to accommodate the barges. As we headed back, we realized the significance of what we had seen. The Mississippi River transports 92% of all U.S. agricultural exports. We were honored to have seen the operation up close and personal. Now if we can just successfully disembark from our canoe without falling in, our adventure will be complete. That's enough to inspire a vocal tribute to Old Man River. The Natchez Trace Parkway could be considered our longest, skinniest national park. It offers a 444-mile historic and scenic drive from Nashville, Tennessee to Natchez, Mississippi. We stopped to see an Indian mound. Emerald Mound was built and used by ancestors of the Natchez Indians from about 1300 to 1600 AD. It's the second largest temple mound in the U.S., covering 8 acres. Archaeologists have filled in a picture of what this ceremonial center may have looked like. Unlike more common burial mounds, this mound had a temple on top, as well as other structures. There wasn't a lot for us to see. The details have been left to our imagination. Natchez, Mississippi is a popular tourist destination, especially for visitors who want to go through impressive antebellum mansions. Viking's Mississippi riverboat was in port the day we were there, along with the American Queen, which sports an actual paddle wheel. The American Queen is the largest river steamboat ever built, a classic recreation completed not in 1895, but 1995. Well, that's enough about the good stuff of Natchez. We wanted to learn about its dark history. So we went to the Forks of the Road, which had been the second largest slave market in the Deep South, second only to New Orleans. Nothing's there now. Federal troops shut it down and cleared out the slave pens in the summer and fall of 1863. But the story is told in a series of placards and signs that recount the horrors of that time. Natchez was at the center of the slave trade. It was a nasty business, but business it was. By the 1800s, changes in agriculture led to a forced migration of slaves from the upper South to the lower South. Again, the Forks of the Road played a clearinghouse role. We toured the home of ex-slave William Johnson, who in turn acquired as many as 15 slaves of his own. He kept a journal starting in the 1840s that documented his life as a free black in Natchez. His journal has become an historic treasure. The construction of St. Mary's Basilica began in 1842, but it wasn't opened until 1882, 40 years later. Our guide told us that slaves had produced the bricks used in this imposing Catholic church, but that the congregation was and is predominantly white. Such is the complex story of Natchez, a lively mix of black and white that offers visitors both beauty and pathos. Upon arrival in New Orleans, our group checked into an Airbnb that was suggestive of classic French Quarter architecture. It was even surrounded by a wrought iron fence and had a picturesque gallery. Such a cool look on the outside, and so spacious and comfortable on the inside. We had heard nothing but praise for the World War II Museum in New Orleans, which had been founded in the year 2000. So that visit became our first priority. It's a Smithsonian affiliate that Congress recognized as America's official National World War II Museum. 7 large pavilions occupy a 7-acre campus in the historic warehouse district of New Orleans. Our visit lasted only a few hours, but it needed to last several days to do justice to this mammoth museum complex. 2 architectural firms, Vorsanger and Matthees, collaborated to design this boldly dramatic home for the museum's 250,000 artifacts. Inside, we found interactive exhibits that drew on 9,000 personal accounts and oral histories to relate the American experience in World War II. The large atrium of the U.S. Freedom Pavilion was where I found several of the aircraft that fought in the war. Take a look. The ground war was highlighted in scenes like these. If you wanted to learn about a specific battle or naval encounter, you could click on its name or location and get a recap of important details. One key role for women at home was to facilitate the mail. A cleverly designed exhibit highlighted its importance in maintaining morale for both the troops and their loved ones. V-mail, or Victory Mail, used microfilm to drastically reduce space needed to send airmail overseas. Between 1942 and 1945, more than 1 billion pieces of mail were photographed, sent by air, and reproduced on the receiving end in this way. At the end of our visit, our group assembled in what was called the American Sector Restaurant and Bar for some tasty chow and libations. Let's go find a swamp. We took a 35-minute drive out of New Orleans to cross the Mississippi River into the bayous and swamps of the Barataria Preserve. The Louisiana Tour Company welcomed us aboard their 60-passenger sightseeing boat. The water appeared to be low as we started out, passing a cemetery where we were undoubtedly sailing below the level of the departed. This is Cajun country, where many of the residents still speak with accents derived from Acadian French. The homes and boat docks we passed had weathered violent storms and had either recovered since then or been totally rebuilt, many on stilts. In 2005, Katrina was the largest hurricane ever to pound the shores of the United States. And in 2021, Ida became Louisiana's second most damaging hurricane, with winds up to 149 miles per hour. But the Cajun and Creole people who made the bayou their home were determined to stay, fish, and maintain their traditional lifestyle. There is beauty and peace in these wild wetlands. We found the Spanish moss to be picturesque, peaceful, and spooky. We saw a couple of the more than 200 species of birds as we made our way through the marshes. This is a great egret, who knows just where to find the good fishing. This tall fellow is a great blue heron. But not all the wildlife we saw was beautiful. This fellow seems perfectly at home, sharing his murky swamp with our boat. In fact, our tour guide knew just how interested we might be in seeing an alligator in his natural habitat. So he threw some marshmallows in the water to lure him a little closer. Not to worry, though. These reptiles aren't out to attack us. They much prefer a diet of fish, birds, turtles, blue crabs, and small mammals. Still, the sight of a 9-foot-long gator killed any desire we might have had to go swimming. When the boat captain brought out a baby alligator to show us, small boys on our voyage couldn't resist holding him. Did I say small boys? Come on, Steve. Now it's time to return to our home dock. Our swamp tour may have ended, but our dreams may replay the image of what we saw. Now it's back to New Orleans and a chance to survey the skyline. The Big Easy, as they call it, has a population of about 360,000 in the city itself, but that's down from more than 600,000 in 1960, and it's continuing to decline, probably due to the weather and flooding challenges New Orleans has faced. From here we get a distant view of the New Orleans Superdome, which is located right downtown. So when the Saints go marching home, this is where they're headed. New Orleans is famous for its above-ground cemeteries, so several of our group paid a visit to St. Joseph Catholic Cemetery, which dates from 1854. It's one of 42 historic New Orleans cemeteries that are known as the Cities of the Dead. Because New Orleans is at or below sea level, the high water table could literally raise the dead out of the ground if buried in a conventional grave. The solution is architecturally and culturally fascinating. Tombs are usually shared with members of families or civic associations, and the often neoclassical design can be very elaborate. Do families ever run out of room? Well, maybe not. The hot subtropical climate of New Orleans assures that a corpse decomposes within about a year, making room for new arrivals. Less pretentious burials are still above ground, but without the fancy trappings. For me, a couple of nights in the French Quarter of New Orleans was an opportunity to revisit the sights and sounds of my youth. I was glad to see the classic architecture with its picturesque balconies and galleries had survived the floods, and the partying crowds were always present, dressed not for Mardi Gras this time, but for Halloween coming up in a couple of days. Our group, a bit more sedate, took refuge in the posh private dining area of historic Brennan's restaurant, starting with cocktails and enlightenment before dinner. Our learned friend Pat led off with his thoughts on the economy.
We were not doing badly as these things go, getting into 2020. And then we had COVID. And that was one of the most incredible shocks. It's the biggest shock to the economy in my lifetime, by a long shot. And everything fell apart completely. And we had, in Keynesian talk, we had a huge shock to both aggregate demand.
Conversation continued non-stop as we headed for dinner on a private balcony overlooking the patio. I ordered filet chanticleer, which proved to be the best prepared steak I had ever had. Dessert was, what else? Bananas Foster, which had been originated by Brennan's years ago. When the dishes had been cleared away, the talk continued non-stop. And continued some more. Until it was time to leave. Now I was looking forward to some Dixieland music, or so I thought. Preservation Hall had closed earlier that night, but Pat O'Brien's bar, with its distinctive dueling piano format and famous hurricane drinks, was just as I remembered it. Except that the crowd was a bit younger by several decades, and the music was a bit newer. Certainly not Dixieland. Our man Bill poured his Tennessee school spirit into Rocky Top, but nobody seemed to mind.
Rocky Top, Tennessee. Rocky Top, Tennessee. Thank you so much.
At closing time, we found ourselves to be the last ones out of Pat O'Brien's, and we heard the door lock behind us. The next night, we went in search of another fancy dinner, this time at the venerable Antoine's restaurant, which dates from 1840. Antoine's is New Orleans' oldest restaurant, and arguably the oldest family-run restaurant in the country, now in the hands of its fifth generation. We relaxed over drinks and conversation, as usual, in the very exclusive escargot room. No surprise, the menu led off with oysters Rockefeller, which had been created by Antoine's in a year when snails were not available. We went on to enjoy other Creole specialties with fancy French sauces and fancy French names. After 2 nights of gourmet dining, we considered ourselves properly spoiled. Back on the street, I thought I heard a bit of Dixieland. But no. Costumed revelers were just jamming to bring on a little Halloween spirit. Finally, we did hear some blues music coming from a club on Frenchman Street. Bamboula's was definitely a happening place, so we grabbed a table and ordered some beer. At last we had found a traditional New Orleans sound, but then the band changed. The music changed a bit, and the dance floor became very crowded. But the crowd was having fun. On this Saturday night, our road trip from Memphis to New Orleans on the Blues Highway had come to an end. And we had come to appreciate the wide range of music that had sprung from workers on the plantations in the Mississippi Delta and spread throughout the land. It evolved from blues and gospel into jazz and all manner of country, folk, and rock music that today we consider distinctively American. It was a wonderful trip, and we have Steve to thank for organizing it. Hey, Steve, we're looking forward to the next adventure.